Tonight we're going to be talking about sedimentary rocks, and I think sedimentary rocks are by far probably some of the most interesting rocks that you can find. So we're going to be talking about how do we classify within the sedimentary rock category. First we're going to look at origin, and that means how does that rock form? Where does it come from? Well, first, to get a sedimentary rock, we've got sediments. Sediments are deposited, usually in a low-lying area, very often through water and being moved into a creek or a lake. Now, once you have deposits of sediments, like you can see in our Grand Canyon picture here, you have rows and rows and rows of sediments that have been deposited. Of course, they start down here and they get deposited up. Well, the weight of the sediments in this row and this row weighs down on the sediments below, and it compacts those sediments, pushes them all together, and they become cemented together. And those layers are called strata. So you can see a lot of strata, each layer here, it would be a strata. So we can see that sedimentary rocks have form in strata or layers. So let's talk about compaction and cementation separately. So in compaction, that happens when you have layer upon layer of sediment that builds up, as we were talking about in the first slide there, and the weight of the sediment above compacts the layers down below. And so they get very close together and very tight. But just pressing a bunch of sediments together does not make a rock. You have to stick them together. So what is nature's glue? What is that cementation process called? And how does it work? Well, first of all, we have water that moves through that sediment, and it will dissolve minerals as it moves through the sediment, and it creates a solution. If you remember when we made our salt crystals, we put the salt in the water, created a solution, and then the salt crystals grew out of that solution. Well, in nature, that mineral water, that solution, flows down through the sediments, and then when it crystallizes, as that salt did crystallize in our plates, then it sticks the little pieces, the sediments, together, and then you have a sedimentary rock. Well, let's look at the way that those rocks are classified. We're going to see that sedimentary rocks are classified in 1, 2, 3 different ways. So let's put a number 3 right there on your notes. So the first one that we're going to look at is a clastic sedimentary rock. We're going to talk about chemical sedimentary rocks and organic sedimentary rocks. But how do you get those 3 different classifications? How does that happen? Let's talk about clastic first. Well, the word clastic itself means pieces. And so clastic sedimentary rocks are rocks that are made from broken fragments of other rocks. Now within that, you can imagine rocks are broken in a lot of different ways, a lot of different sizes, a lot of different shapes. So we have to look at the different size and shape of the grain. Remember, grain is the individual pieces that make up the rock. Now here we're looking at some examples. And on your note sheet, you'll see that these titles here have boxes below them, and what I'd like for you to do is to draw in the picture of the rocks. But let's talk about them so you can make sure that you show the features. First of all, the size of the grain here, we have 3 sizes. We have the small, the medium, and then the large. So let's draw those first. Your small grain is called shale. When you are drawing this, I just kind of want you to do a shape And then just kind of shade it in. Trying to get this pen to work here. Just kind of shade it in with your pencil. You're not really going to show any grain because the grain is so small that you really cannot see it. Try to stay inside your lines. So you're going to shade that all in, and it's going to be kind of solid. Now when you get to the sandstone, draw an outline that represents your sandstone. It doesn't have to be exactly like this. Sandstone is medium grade. You can see that grain. So you might want to do a little shading with your pencil. And you can see here we've got some strata showing up. Different lines. You can see the different lines and strata. And then you might want to show some little dots to represent the grain. Now guess what this is made from? Sand. That's right. So imagine just a bunch of sand that's been compacted and cemented together. It's going to feel a little rough, and that's going to be your sandstone. And you could even use different colors if you would like. And you can pause the video at any time to draw the picture and then start it back again. Now, shale is very fine. It has clay. Clay is a very fine particle. Now, our conglomerate over here, you can see, is a large grain. And you can see the individual pieces. I want you to notice that these are all roundish, though. So when you draw your grains, I want you to draw them all kind of rounded. And you'll see why that's going to be important in just a few moments. So, and they can be various sizes, but you're going to be able to see them. And you can see right here where some of them have even broken out. Now, let's come down here to shape. You need to turn your note sheet over now. The shape of the grain. We have two big examples here, angular and rounded. So angular, when you're drawing your angular rock, do a whole outline of the rock. And then within the rock, you'll see your pieces have angles on them. Now that would be because, well, they never were weathered, and so they still are broken and sharp, just like when they first broke. This rock is called breccia. Now over here we have rounded, and this is our conglomerate again, and you'll see why it was important to make them round, because our conglomerate is when you have pieces that have been weathered and are round. So what do you think would have weathered these rocks, and where would we have found them? That's right, you probably guessed it, water. So these were probably found in a creek or a river or a stream somewhere and deposited. All right, that concludes our pictures of our different rocks, and we'll be looking at more of these rock samples in class. All right, our next type of rock, remember we were talking about clastic sedimentary rocks. This is called a chemical sedimentary rock. Chemical sedimentary rocks form when minerals crystallize out of solution. Our biggest example of this is what we find in a cave, stalactites and stalagmites. So again, if you'll remember our salt that we created a solution from, and then we let it crystallize on the plate. Well, this right here is halite. Now this is rock salt. So this has, I didn't mean to cross that off, halite. This has salt in it, but it has a combination of some other minerals, then that makes it a rock. If it was just salt, just plain salt, then it would still be in a mineral format. Now, the stalactites and stalagmites are known as chemical limestone. And that's because it has a lot of calcite in it. We don't really have too many examples of chemical sedimentary rock. We deal more with the other two brand. So here's this is the third one, the organic sedimentary rock. Now these are rocks that have something organic, and we talked about organic already, which means it comes from something that was living or once lived or came from something that was once living. So these are things that form from once living organic things. These are the rocks that have fossils in them, so they're pretty interesting types of rocks. Coral also is a type of organic rock because it's made from living things. The remains or the homes kind of what the living things made to be in for protection. And here's an example of an organic limestone, and you can see the fossil in it right here, the shell fossil. So whenever you see fossil in a rock, you know that that rock is a sedimentary rock, and it is an organic sedimentary rock. Now sometimes we also have sedimentary rocks that form from plants. Coal is a big example of a sedimentary rock that formed from a plant. They are from ancient swamps. And then also we have plants that imprint in rocks. So sometimes shale that's made from clay, in mud, you'll have plants that lay down and leave an impression in the rock like this leaf did right here. And we'll have a chance to look at some of those also in class that came from Georgia. And our last piece of note that we need to write down is about stratification, and that's just to understand that sedimentary rocks arrange in layers, and that's because that sediment is being laid down, and it's going to lay down in a layer. So when we see flat layering like this, it's almost always sedimentary rock. Just to look at a few nice little pictures of some strata or sedimentary rocks. The Grand Canyon, made of sedimentary rocks. Another view of the Grand Canyon. You can definitely see the strata there. In our own state of Georgia, we have the Little Grand Canyon, Providence Canyon. You can see the strata there. Cloudland Canyon in the northwest Georgia. We have a lot of sedimentary rock in northwest Georgia with some fossils. Another good example of strata. And that ends our notes here, so please bring these completed notes to class.